everybody. So glad to be here with you. I'm Ben Eubanks. I'm the Chief Research Officer for Lighthouse, and it is my job, like all of you, to understand why candidates make some of the decisions they do, what we can do to serve new employees as they're coming to the organization. I love using the research as a method to answer those kind of questions. And I actually got my start in HR, in recruiting. So I recruited Black Hawk helicopter instructor pilots, you can believe it. So I've done some of the hard work that all of you are doing, trying to dig through, trying to attract, trying to convert. I've done all those kinds of things. And now I get a chance to help serve all of you with the research we produce. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you, Mike, because we're going to dive into some fun stuff today, share some data, have some good conversation around this. Why don't you tell the audience more about who you are and what you do?
Mike Calpe, I'm the Director of Product Globalization for HiBob, which is essentially a fancy title that means I help with our vision and strategy for our product. I've been with HiBob for a little over 3 years, but I've been in the HR tech space for over 20. So I am glad to be here. I think I see some familiar names in the chat, so I've probably met you at some event or in person somewhere. So thanks for joining us today, and let's engage and have some fun.
All right, awesome. Before we get into stuff, so you have a poll, yes.
There you go. I was going to mention the poll, Ben. So before we do that, we just want to do a simple poll, and really, if you know about us or not. So thank you for engaging with the poll.
All right. I'm so excited about this one, Mike. It's fun because talking about talent acquisition is always exciting because all of us have been a candidate at one point. So we see things from that side. And I'll say it breaks my heart sometimes when I talk to HR or I talk to recruiting leaders and they're talking about their own experiences as the candidate going through things and be like, listen, if I worked at that company, it would look different. It would feel different. So I'm hoping today as we're going through this, we can give them some good tools, some good takeaways and things to help them maybe think differently about that, get some better outcomes overall.
Absolutely.
All right. Gonna give the poll just another second and done. Okay, perfect. All right. We're ready to dive in. So here's how we're going to structure it today. I'm going to go through and I'm going to share some of the data with you. I'm going to talk through some of the key findings in the research, some of the things that we think are interesting, notable, big themes and trends, things like that. And then we're going to transition, and Mike and I are going to have sort of a fireside chat. We're going to talk through some of the big ideas and topics, things that we're seeing. And at that point of the conversation, we would love for you to be, again, engaged in the chat, bring your questions, bring your ideas. We want you to be part of this overall. We don't want to talk at you. We want to talk with you through this. And after we finish that portion, we'll take questions. We'll dive into that and try to wrap up right on time today so everybody can get back to their day. So we've got a lot of good stuff in front of us. So let's go ahead and dive into that. Really quickly about the research, here's what you can expect. So we surveyed employers. We have over 1,200 of those companies responded to this. Some of you may have been respondents to this survey, and if so, thank you. Answering about what are their biggest trends around talent acquisition, your challenges, your priorities, all of that good stuff, as well as 1,000 candidate responses. So when we're citing this today, we didn't ask 10 of our best friends. We went out there and did a really serious in-depth piece of research on this to understand what's going on and what's changing there. And you'll notice, as I just said a minute ago, we want you chiming in. I'm going to give you a chance right now to chime in. So I want to hear from you. I've already seen you in the chat. Zach queued all of you up, so I know you'll be engaged. So I'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and drop this in the chat while we're getting started here. What is the hardest job that you have to fill at your company? I've heard everything, by the way, in recent weeks, everything from like very specialized doctors and things in the medical field to people who are literally digging ditches. It's like this whole range of skills and types of roles, everything else. So I'd love to hear from some of you what those things are, just to give me an idea as we're going through the conversation today. It'll help me think about the kinds of companies I'm talking to, the leaders I'm talking to, some of the challenges that you're facing. Okay, excellent. Lots of things in technology, fundraising. Oh, goodness, people in nonprofit fundraising, they are real champions. Professors, executives, okay. Forklift drivers, see, it's all ends of the spectrum. There's not one or the other. Okay, investigators, sorry, clinicians. Okay, wonderful. All right, great. Thank y'all for chiming in there. So as we can see here, it's not like everybody's got this down and we just got one field or one specific type of job that's hard to fill. There's a whole range of roles that are difficult for employers to figure out, and I've been doing a lot of research on this in the last year or two to dive into it and share more about how to recruit, how to retain, and how to keep the best people. So today we're going to give you some data on that and help you out. So to start off, I'm going to talk about 3 of the big challenges we're seeing in the research that are plaguing employers that are holding them back right now. So number 1, creating predictability in hiring. In some areas of our life, we like a little bit of spice, a little bit of unpredictability. We were chatting before we started recording today. Mike told us he's a little bit of a renegade sometimes. He pushes the boundaries in a positive way. But when it comes to hiring, we want predictability. We want to know what to expect because our hiring managers want to know what to expect. We want to know when that job's going to be filled. And yet the majority of companies tell us they have trouble forecasting and looking ahead and figuring out how many people they're going to hire. And one of the things we see in the data is things like recruiting automation can help with that, but can also create more problems. We make it really easy for people to apply to jobs. Suddenly we have more people to sift through and sort through. And increasingly, we're seeing some problems with candidates using some tools that make them make all their resumes start to look the same. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that's one of the big problems is that predictability piece. Number two is actually measuring this. When it comes to measuring the outcomes in hiring, many of us rely on things like time to fill. That's not a bad thing inherently, but if that's the only number we're using, it doesn't tell us about the quality, the impact, the results that we're having on the organization. So many companies struggle, as we see in the data, to figure out what's going on in hiring because they have a little bit of the data over here, or someone's keeping a spreadsheet over here, or their ATS captures some of it, but not all of it, or they're using a partner and they submit through their own channels, things like that. That makes it really hard to see the one source of truth for what's happening. It makes it hard for them to report back to their leadership team and share with them. And then last but not least here, disparate experiences. Zach kind of keyed on this a little bit earlier, but we see this like, here's what it's looked like for the recruiting, like high touch, high support, white glove. And then you get in the organization and it may not be quite the same, or that experience as you're going through the process. You're attracted, but as they're trying to get you through the application, it's not quite candidate friendly, we'll say. So a lot of companies are struggling there, struggling with onboarding. And we're going to talk through, again, some of these big trends, some of the things, and try to get you some good ideas based on the data on what you can do differently. So when we ask employers across the board, these are some big trends, but we ask them, what are their priorities? In the coming year, what are you focusing on most? And in a survey about hiring, one of the things that surprises me is when the audience comes back and says the number one thing is the very tail end of the hiring process as we're easing them into the employment situation, it's onboarding. Number one, it jumped more places than any other response this year. So you see here, not just the top 6 answers, but also their relative change from last year. So onboarding jumped all the way up to number one. It's a big priority for employers. As we'll see in some of the data points we share in a little bit, many companies are struggling to put this into practice in a way that's meaningful to every single person. And if you're one of those companies that suddenly has had remote or virtual or hybrid work kind of thrown in your lap in the last few years, that creates more complexity. It's not as simple as welcoming someone into the front door, sitting them down in their chair and moving on from there. Companies are also thinking about recruit marketing. I was talking to a TA leader this morning, and he was telling me that their team is really struggling with how to compete with bigger companies. He's like, we don't have the budget of these really large retail companies. We're trying to figure out how to compete. So what can we do to stand out? How can we market our brand and talk about our culture in a way that appeals to and attracts the right people whose values align with our organization? As well, candidate experience is up there. Diversity and inclusion has been in the top 5 priorities for several years now. So all of these are big things. One of the other ones that pops up in here, and some of you may have mixed feelings on this one, is the hiring manager relations. So many of us struggle with how to get along with our hiring managers, how to have clear communications, how to make sure that the things we're working on are the things that they would want us to work on as HR and talent leaders. So that one has always been up there as well as a priority, because we try to figure out how to create more clarity, how to create more connections there with those leaders. All right, Mike, I'm going to surprise you here. I'm going to throw this out at you, and it's okay if you don't, how you answer. I want to see, you're going to represent the audience here. So I'd love to get an idea from you. How long do you think it takes someone to know if they're going to stay at your company? Thoughts?
I'm going to say it's a short time. I mean, I would say within the first 60 days. Maybe.
Okay, shorter than that, actually. So even faster, like you're giving some grace there. You're like, okay, we're going to have some leeway. So what we see in the data is 2 out of 3 candidates tell us that they know if they're going to stay at a job in the first week on the job, the first 5 days. So there's a lot of pressure on us as employers. And that's one reason we see employers focusing so much on the onboarding piece. That's my hypothesis here anyway, because candidates are telling us, I'm going to know pretty quickly. And increasingly, many of them are juggling multiple offers. So if it doesn't work out the first couple of days, I'm out of here and I'll go work with someone else. And I saw several people, I think Lisa was one of the ones that commented earlier saying problems with ghosting, one of the things that her companies struggled with. And some of you may have struggled with the same kind of thing. We see in the data that more and more candidates are saying, hey, even though I accepted that offer, I'm still going to keep my options open for in case something else comes up, anywhere from a few weeks until I'm never really fully committed to this company. So that really reinforces the importance of transparency and focusing on culture and some of the other things that Mike and I will talk about in a little bit. Those things are going to be so important in that kind of environment because you've got to stand out from all the other companies that are out there. Now, on this onboarding piece, here's an actual data point for you. So when we're thinking about what your process looks like, there's a couple different maturity levels, we'll call it here, right? From the we're compliant, we've got your tax documents, we've got your government forms, all that good stuff, your policy sign-offs, and that's it. To this middle tier, which is we're kind of engaging, we're connecting with resources, with people, all those good things, but it's not really great. Okay, it's not really personalized or tailored. And then only 15% of companies say that we are fully personalizing this. It's supporting that individual. It's making sure they're connected to the work they're doing. They feel like you're part of the right organization. They see a path ahead. All of those things that matter to an individual. And in a bit, we'll talk about again more about onboarding and how to really tailor that. But this one helps me if I'm thinking about what my priorities are as a leader, as one of you. I'm talking my own leadership. What can we do in onboarding? How can we invest in this? What sort of structure do we need to have here? Do we need to be doing these things asynchronously and spend our face-to-face time on things that are more important, like building connection, building relationships, not just repeating policies they could have read off prior to even showing up on day one? So we got to be really careful and strategic about how we're using that time, because if we're not doing it quickly, we're not doing it properly, that clock is ticking down. Right, that 5-day clock is ticking down for 2 out of 3 people, and they may decide that this company isn't really the right one for them if we don't do the right things to connect with them right off the bat. And one of the other things you saw in that list of top 6 was recruiting automation, AI. It's a big conversation. It's a lot of things happening there, and I want to share something that candidates are doing, because I love sharing this with leaders like you, because I often get that sort of look on your face when you see this, because it's so surprising. So one of the tools that candidates have out there that they can use is this thing called Final Round AI. And there are other ones. This isn't the only one. But let's say that Mike is interviewing me for a job, and we're doing it over on Zoom. And Mike asked me a question about a time that I was leading a team through a struggle. That algorithm sits there and listens to the question, and then across my screen just gives me a teleprompter to read back the answer to Mike without me having to think of or prepare for the interview at all. It just tells me the answer to give him, the answer that's most likely to help me get through the interview and get the job. If that worries you just a little bit, it probably should. See, candidates are using tools like ChatGPT and others to change their resumes to look like the job posting. And they're using those things to try to position themselves better in the hiring process. And we can argue that's cheating, that's brilliant use of technology, that's a debate for another time. But if they're using these tools, employers are going to have to think about how we're using automation, how we're using smart, intelligent hiring solutions, or we're going to fall behind. We're going to struggle with this. I was in North Carolina about 2 weeks ago talking to a leader, and she said a year ago, about 2 out of 10 of our resumes coming in, we could tell have been kind of doctored using ChatGPT. She said now it's about 8 out of 10. And we have trouble figuring out because they look almost exactly the same. All of them come out looking very similar, and it makes it hard for us to filter through and find the right candidates. It's a real struggle. So here's the actual data point on this, how companies are sort of fighting back, what sort of tools they're using. So you may be using some of these, all of these, none of these. It's hard to tell right here, but if I'm giving you some encouragement on this, it's we should be using something. We should be using these and not spending all of our time churning through the busy work. We need to focus on the human connection in recruiting. And the good thing is when we're using any sort of automation, any sort of intelligent tools, any sort of AI, whatever you want to call it, it gets us closer to people. So I don't know about you, but I did not get into recruiting because I wanted to look through a stack of 150 resumes, or because I wanted to do some of those kinds of things like scheduling interview follow-ups and then rescheduling interview follow-ups when the hiring manager's out unexpectedly and all those kind of things. Those aren't the reasons we do it. We do it because we want to help someone find a career that matters. We do it because we want to help the company attract and have the very best talent possible. We do it because we want to have an impact on our community, helping people find jobs that are meaningful. Like those are the things that really appeal to us. And the tasks that you typically see here on the left aren't really feeding into that very well. So we need to spend our time on those things that do matter, that do add value. And let's use some of these other things to schedule the interviews, those kinds of things. Let's hand that stuff off so we can focus on what really does add some value for the candidates and as for us as well, some career enjoyment, if you will. Now, there's actually excuse me, there's actually a quick story I want to tell you about everybody's favorite online retailer. They did this experiment a few years ago, and I want to see if this creeps you out just a little bit. I want you to chime in the chat and tell us why. Okay, so Amazon was struggling to find some talent in one of its key markets, and so they put this algorithm together that said, okay, Ben applies for this job. Ben's got a bachelor's degree in engineering, or he spent 2 years at Google, so he's preliminary qualified. So that algorithm would send me an assessment. Let's take this coding assessment, see how good you are. I passed the coding assessment, no, good score. That algorithm then sends me a job offer at the current market rate without me talking to a hiring manager, interacting with a recruiter, no contact with the company at all. Okay, breathe that in for a second. Now, if that makes you feel a little bit creeped out or a little weird, chime in the chat. Tell me why. Tell me what sort of things that could be missing if we're using an algorithm to just automatically screen and pick someone, make the offer without them ever having an interaction with any of us. I'll tell you one of the ones that comes up pretty regularly. Okay, we get some good questions, some good comments coming in. Okay, no human connection. Fraud. Yes, April. We're actually seeing a bunch of problems with candidate fraud right now. I was talking to a friend with Southwest Airlines the other day about that. The human element, Mary. Yes. How about this? Would any of us want to work for a company that spent exactly 0 time trying to connect with us, trying to build a relationship? Probably not. And we're missing that human connection. We're missing the culture piece. We're missing all these kinds of things. How about this? Jessica, emotional intelligence. Yes. So how about this? I don't know if you've ever seen this resume. I mean, no one on the resume says, you know what, I don't really work well with others. I don't like working on teams. Don't ask me a question before 9 o'clock on Tuesday because I haven't had my 3rd coffee yet. No one says those things, and yet they really happen. So maybe you've got this resume and you're like, wait a minute, this person wants to work with us. Like, oh, this is so exciting. I can't wait for them to show up. This is going to be thrilling. And the person shows up for the interview and you're like, oh gosh, what happened? Like, what did I miss? There were some red flags or something. Like, this is a real problem. So we miss things when we're just looking at a resume. We're missing the human piece. And I know that's a part of what Mike and the whole team at HiBob, they spent a lot of time and effort doing that on the employee side. They've started doing that on the candidate side as well, thinking about how to connect those dots. Right? We're missing that piece, the human connection, as all of you shared right there. Okay, I'm going to share 1 or 2 more stats with you, and then if you want to skip over and start some conversation with Mike, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to get through that fireside chat portion. So here's some data for you on the candidate side. We talked a lot about the employer, your perspectives as leaders. Here's what the candidates are telling us. When we ask them what matters most, this is their ranked list and how it compares to last year. As you can tell, those top 3 or 4, 5, all were important last year, and they kept on edging out more and more important this year. So knowing what the starting pay is, they don't want to get 3 conversations in and find out that it's not a match for what they're expecting. They want an application process that doesn't make them want to pull their hair out. They want a company that says, hey, we don't want to just hire you for a dead end job. We want to hire you for the long term. We have a vision for your success here. We want to help grow you and help you be even more valuable in your career long term. And people are looking for those things, and candidates are telling us over and over. By the way, for those of you that mentioned things like I hire forklift drivers and things like that, people who have to be physically present on a job, those frontline workers, when we ask frontline workers what's number 1 for them, that one about commitment to helping them grow is number 1. That's their biggest priority. So many of them take a job with a manager that says, hey, don't worry, we'll talk about that. What's next for you, your next career step at your 6-month review. And that time comes and goes, and that conversation never comes up. They lose the leverage to have that conversation because they've accepted the offer. So for those individuals, that's number 1. They want to have that conversation right up front. They want to know what's happening there. Okay. So let's go ahead. We'll transition over here. I've got a good story I want to share later on in the conversation, Mike, if we get a moment free before the Q&A. But let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to talk about some of the things that from the data, from the research, from stories, from customers, all that good stuff. We're going to give you some solutions, some strategies, some ideas, things that you can put into practice. You've seen some of the data. Now we're going to have some conversation here. So I'm going to throw this first one to you, Mike, and let you answer first, and we'll kick it back and forth a little bit. So our first question, we saw this come up already from some of the audience mentioning it, but how can we reduce candidate ghosting? What's top of mind for you?
Wow, this is definitely a big topic. And in fact, I think, we all could agree that, ghosting is really much more than just an inconvenience. But what we've learned in talking to organizations that, it could also be a sign that there are potential issues within the organization or the hiring process itself. We found that candidates believe the number one reason the hiring process drags on too long is actually due to the hiring policies or process rather than individual delays from the recruiter or the hiring manager. We also learned that 70% of candidates say they frequently or occasionally experience frustration during the hiring process. Compounding the matter, right? Your hiring managers are doing a full-time job. And so how do we make it easy for them to participate in the process, to help lead the process, and for that process to run smoothly? Recently, we've been having conversations around, starting with something simple like, how do you communicate? Or more specific, what is your communication style? What does the candidate prefer, right? Traditional methods like email and phone calls are not working as well as they used to in the past. And I am very, very guilty of this. If someone calls me and I do not recognize the number, I don't answer it. And if you don't leave a voicemail, I don't call you back. And so I'm guilty of that. And personally, as a hiring manager, I found text to be much better communication tool. So I'm starting to use texting a lot, and then hiring across the pond, I'm using WhatsApp quite a bit. Another thing that I think organizations are looking to do is, looking at the tools that they're using, right? So, one system that includes hiring, onboarding, HR with an interface that's really easy, a way to optimize workflows and then continue to refine those workflows, help in reducing frustrations, help with finding those areas that we can optimize. And at the very least, if you don't have one system today that does all of that, right? You've got to sit back and review the process often to find those efficiencies. And I am, again, guilty of this, where work can sometimes get in the way. Your head's down, you're going through the process, you need to take care of some things today, and it's hard to step back and look at the bigger picture to try to make improvements. And so, one, start simple. How are we communicating? We can fix those types of things, and then at the bigger picture is, where can we find those efficiencies and put in a better process, to help candidates stay engaged.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a good tie-in. April actually just mentioned like surveying applicants, like see how that's going. One of the things we see in the research, April, is we ask candidates, would you want to respond if a company asked you to? 70% of them, I think 75% said yes. Have you ever been asked by an employer? 70% said no. So many of them want to, they're open to it, but they're not getting a chance to chime in for the employers. I was working with a company last year, a Canadian organization, and they actually do three quick surveys, like 2 or 3 questions each. I think the post-hire one's a little longer, but the first one is after you've had a conversation with them, after you've had an interview with them, and then if you're hired, ultimately you get that final one. And after the interview or the rec closes, anyone that didn't get hired also gets a, hey, what could we have done better sort of thing. So they're getting a little bit of touch point across the entire process instead of just saying, hey, Mike got hired, let's see what he has to say, because it's going to be positive and nice and not very helpful for us from a process standpoint. So there's one of the things in the data we see, to your points, Mike, as you're sharing there, you talk about the process being the thing that drags us out. When we look at the reasons candidates tell us they ghost, 2 of the top 3 reasons come down to speed. So the hiring process took too long, or the hiring process took too long, or I accept another offer. So those sorts of things make it hard for us if we're dragging that out or letting hiring managers say, nope, we've got to have a 5-step high. Okay, just know that the people who are going to be leaving the process are going to be the very best ones. The people who have lots of options, lots of people seeking them, they're the ones who are going to bail out of that long process. The ones who are maybe not as high quality of candidate, they're willing to stick around, have more patience because they're not as in demand. So that's a really, really big one. And one of the other things, I know we'll talk about some, Mike, in the conversation going on, but how we communicate with candidates, the number one reason candidates ghost is because once they learn more about the company, it's not what they thought it was. It's not really a place they want to work. And I'm like, that's kind of okay. I'd rather know before we hire them, before I have 3 conversations in, they're not interested. But I know that's important for you and the team at Highball, like sharing your culture, sharing what you're about. Y'all do a great job of that out in the community. So no one should be surprised when they show up, like what y'all are all about and how you believe.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Right.
I think, Kevin, you said it best is, ghosting happens everywhere, right? It happens with
Yes.
candidates, it happens with employees, it happens recruiters, like it happens everywhere. And I think, just understanding, some methods on reducing ghosting or making sure that communication is done in a much better way, is the right thing to do.
Yes. Someone said, is a multi-step interview process good? Yes. The candidates that we survey actually tell us that anything beyond 3 touch points. So if you have a phone screen, I have an interview, I have a follow-up, they say that's enough. That they don't need 4 or 5, 6. I talked to a company recently that does 12 rounds of interviews, and that made me want to just punch myself in the head because I can't imagine doing that to someone. So candidates say that if someone makes less than $50,000 a year, so if you're hiring someone for an hourly role, more of a manual labor position, things like that, they say 2 touch points is enough. So there should be some expectation there. If we're hiring an executive, yes, we'll probably have more touch points with them. But if someone who's coming in to do a little more of a basic role, they don't need this screen to the nth degree. Let's just check them out and let them get to work and get out of their way, essentially.
Yeah, I think one of the other things around ghosting that we've learned is that if you share, what's expected within the process with a candidate, and then you change that process, right? Hey, this is going to be a 3-step process. Here's what it's going to look like. Here are the people you're going to talk to, and then all of a sudden you add another step or you change another step. This affects the candidate. Now they're thinking, well, do they really do what they say? Do they really do what they mean? And so it's caused a lot of discussion, in not just on my team, but with organizations that we talk to. Is, hey, let's do what we say, right? If you have a process, let's stick to it. If there's a change, tell them why it's a change, right? Just don't say here's the change, because that could affect the candidate thought process on joining your organization.
Excellent. Great takeaway there and great recommendation. Just being transparent, being open, share. Okay, be human. How about that? That's maybe no surprise for us. Okay. All right. So next up, hiring metrics. What metrics are most important? How do we get buy-in on that? How do we get our leadership to really want to see these, be looking at these, be asking about these? How can we build that hunger? Any suggestions or thoughts on that one, Mike?
Yeah, I think we all know hiring metrics are really essential to any hiring strategy, right? They're used to track and manage, and they're used to optimize our hiring strategy. But one thing we learned is that, it's really the collecting and processing of that data that's really the true hassle. It is the challenge. I still hear from organizations that they're using spreadsheets to track hiring data, right? It's a manual workaround. They don't trust the actual data, right? Because they found mistakes or it's not compliant. And so it's hard to accurately track the data or look for trends and patterns accurately. And so you need a system or tool that's much better. In fact, we also found that 75% of teams struggle to accurately forecast their hiring needs, and 58% of those missed their hiring plan last year. So when you think of that, that put the overall business plan at risk. And so, how do we get that insight? And so when you think about what hiring metrics are most important, we're hearing, did we forecast accurately, and did we hit that forecast? And if we missed, if we were up or low, what were the reasons behind it, so we can continue to optimize in areas or find efficiencies to better gain the proper metrics that we want to hit.
Yes, I agree with you. I like the optimization piece you mentioned there, because it's not just knowing what's happening, but once we have some idea of the numbers, we can say, well, that's actually better than the industry average. How do we replicate that across some of our other areas? Or we're twice as slow as the benchmark we have from a year ago. What happened? What's going on here? What is slowing this down, and how can we speed it back up again? So not just knowing where you are like a snapshot, but seeing this full cycle and being able to use that for process improvement. So I just posted this in the chat, but the number one thing that when we ask leaders like you, what proves your value back to the business? It's not how fast you do it. It's not the cost per fill. It's the quality of hire. Am I bringing in the people who are producing the work? Do I bring in someone that's able to get up to speed quickly and start performing on the job? So when we ask employers a layer deeper, how do you actually measure that? Because quality of hire can feel a little bit amorphous. The top 3 things are: they stick around, Once they join us, they don't leave 30 days later. They stick around. They perform well as a new hire. And then their hiring manager that brought them in, when we check with them, they're actually satisfied. Like, yes, we made the right choice. So what are our vectors there that show us we're picking the right people? One of the problems with quality of hire is that unless you're hiring someone on your team, you don't own that. So the hiring manager, so that's one reason that hiring manager relations, what are the top 6 priorities? That's one of the things that comes up over and over again, because we don't ultimately make that choice for them. We can influence, we can direct, we can guide, but we can't say, hey, make this choice. Mike is the right guy, pick him. Mary's the right lady, pick her. We can't do those kind of things. We have to influence them. So that's one of the reasons quality of hire is both great and very challenging as a metric, because we don't control those kinds of things and make the ultimate decisions at the end.
Yeah, and I think you said that it right, Ben. Right, it's influence. I was talking to a Bob user this past week, and this topic came up, and I said, "Hey, how do you get buy-in?" And she said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, if you need to make changes to your process, you need new tools. How do you get buy-in?" She goes, "It's not that I need to get buy-in. It's if I show the data and I show that we've missed or did not accurately forecast this." This is the hot topic. This is what the C-suite is talking about. And so it's not that I have to get buy-in, but I need to really prove to them why here's what's happening today. And then we need to focus on these specific areas. And so it was just an interesting conversation, because it's not a how, it's actually a when. When do you need to have that conversations with the business and then focus on that to make sure you're doing the right things.
Yes. Goodness. Okay. All right. I'm trying to watch the time, trying to keep us to that. So we're going to go to the next one here. Again, we could spend a lot of time on this. If there's one of these topics that you want to get deeper into, Mike's contact information and mine will be at the end, that we can dive more into that. One of the questions I want to touch on really quick before we go to that is, several people mentioned, I didn't get the names, I apologize at the beginning, but we're asking about priorities. Several of you mentioned diversity hiring, some of the things there. So we have a little bit of data on that. We have the top 10 ways companies are actually trying to support that. So if you want to see it, happy to share that out with you. I didn't have it in the deck here today, but I have that top 10 from our research last year on how companies are trying to solve for that. And so happy to share that list out with you if you want to see what those look like. Okay. So next question up, I'm like pitching them at you, Mike, like as fast as I can get through. So transparency. Hiring process has a lot of pieces. You hinted at this earlier. We talked about, we make a change, we need to be open and share about that. How else can we support transparency and make that a priority in the hiring process?
Yeah, this one is definitely a big topic, right? And I think there's a lot of organizations struggling with this, a lot of teams struggling with, what does this really mean? And so I think it starts with, just answering the question, what makes the hiring process transparent? Like, what is it, right? We all know transparency is the clarity, integrity, and fairness, from the organization. And to that fact, we expect the candidate to do the same, right? We expect candidates to be honest and forthcoming, and so transparency takes a central role regardless. And and when I talk to organizations, I usually start with something simple like job descriptions, right? And I say, are your job descriptions clear? Are they honest? Do they include the hiring criteria that's needed to perform the job? Right? It sounds simple, right? Then you start asking more questions. Well, how, do you have a job catalog, and where does that sit? And more often, yes, organizations have a job catalog, but it needs to be updated. That's what I hear all the time. Oh, but we need to be updated. Oh, we haven't really looked at it. Oh, there's so many things happening, and so I think transparency starts with the simple things of, are the descriptions clear and honest, and does it include the criteria that is needed, right? And then, do you have a process for continual refinement of those things? Things are going to change all the time, so you definitely need that process. And then we started having these conversations about, does your EVP match reality? And I am very, very guilty of this as a hiring manager. You have a candidate, they're a cultural fit, a cultural add. You really want them, and you go immediately into selling your brand proposition, right? Why this candidate should join your team, your company, and all the amazing things that's going to happen. But we haven't shared things like our vulnerabilities, in some cases, really harsh realities and true behaviors throughout the organization, right? Everybody has like this different idea of, what is good culture? And you can hear people, we have great culture, right? But can you give clear, tangible examples of what that looks like in your organization? And so, I talk to organizations like, well, where do we start with that? Well, let's start with something simple. Let's do this use case, right? When a new rec is opened, is there a process for internal mobility? Do you share that with your employees? Is it written? Is it clearly written? And do your employees know about it? Do your managers encourage employees to go through that process? Because even that internal mobility will be important for candidates. Candidates, yes, they're looking for the job that's in question, right? They're looking to get acceptance and you to make that offer for that particular job. But they're also looking for, well, what does life look like for me in a year, 2 years? What are the advancement opportunities? What does that look like? And so essentially, culture is like what life is like at your organization. So you got to share what life is like at your organization, the good, the bad, and all that comes with it. And so when you think of transparency, there are things we can do from as simple as job descriptions, but also making sure we share what the true realities are happening within the organization.
100%, for sure. I think all of us have probably had some example, a situation where we expect something, get something else, and it feels like a betrayal almost. Even if it's unintentional, it feels like a betrayal in the hiring process. Um, my first HR job I ever worked for, I worked for a company with about 600 employees or so, and we had turnover about 50% a year. And about half of that turnover was happening in the first 30 days on the job. So something was happening, something, they were getting sold something, they were not getting a real preview of the job, they were not seeing the realities, and they were getting shocked by something and ended up leaving early on. And so we had to work to actually fix that if we're going to correct that and extend that out longer. And that ties back to a question someone was asking in the chat there a minute ago about what's a good retention benchmark to look for. It really depends on the company. If you hire people and they typically are leaving that quickly, if I had got someone that would have stayed 6 months, that would have been a big win for us. That would have really dramatically been successful. But in other companies, if you have people that stay for a year, 2 years, 10 years, then a 1 year turnover may be more sufficient for that. So looking at the quality piece there. One of the other things here on the back to the transparency component that I wanted to encourage is we saw when we ask candidates outright, what do you want to know? They want to know the pay. The other things they care about, Mike talked about, like the culture, the values, what it's like to be here. Not just culture like what we wrote on the wall over there in the lobby, get back to work, but this is what it's like to live and breathe in this organization. Here's how you're treated. Here's how we support each other, all those kind of things. The process they're going through, what that looks like, how many steps to expect, all of that is important to share with them. And then a career path, what sort of things are there? All of those are important for people to know. And if they can see that, what's really interesting is they can start to see themselves at your company. I talked to an organization about a week ago they'll do virtual tours of their office. So people who are not going to be working there except for 1 day a week, they do a virtual tour of the office during the hiring process and say, if you worked with us, here's what it would look like when you come in on day one. And like, here's where Rosa sits and you can meet her and she'll direct you this way. And here's where the rest of the team is. And if you want to get lunch, here's the best places. And they're doing this walkthrough of the office and showing them what it looks like virtually and giving them a chance to visualize themselves in that role. So that connects with them on a deeper level. So there's lots of things we can do there around transparency, and that creates better trust, better retention, and ultimately better relationships long-term.
Yeah, one other thing I think, Kelvin, again, not to pick on you, but I'm seeing your chat there is, being careful about sharing sensitive information. So one of the things I've seen work really well with transparency is ensuring that your hiring managers or hiring teams are actually trained and enabled on, ensuring that they share what that life is like, right? So, I share my own stories a lot. What happened to me, in this process, how I felt, what it did for me, what value I got out of this process or didn't get out of it, what questions I still have. And so, it's again those authentic and meaningful touches within the hiring process that are key. And transparency has the central role, but how do you do that? And so that's what I've seen work well, is making sure that the hiring teams understand it's okay to talk about your team. It's okay to share what that is like, because you're giving the candidates real world examples of what that culture and what life is like at your organization.
Yes, absolutely. So that one of the comments from April here ties in with our last topic. I'm going to kind of tie those two things together and pass it to you, Mike. So our last question we're going to talk about here before we give you some takeaways and do some Q&A. So if you got specific questions, use the Q&A tab in the chat. It kind of gets lost sometimes. If you got a question, drop in the Q&A. We've already got a couple in there. But April said a minute ago, as we're sharing transparency, also share other ways for people to engage, contribute, committees, like things that they can start getting connected in on. And I think that's a good tie into this onboarding piece. Like, how do we, if onboarding is number one priority for employers, what are some things we can do to change that, to evolve that, to improve that experience for people, get closer to that 15% of companies, to that top end, that are actually doing something very personalized, very tailored, very connected to the individual. Mike, you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, no, this one is, in my opinion, it's more of it's between the reactive and proactive challenge, right? And it's all focusing on continuous improvement. You heard that saying, first impressions count. Well, all impressions count. Every engagement, any interaction that you have, with a candidate counts. And there was a Gallup poll that revealed 12% of employees strongly agree that their organization does a great job of onboarding. Wow, that is low to me. And on top of that, when I think about it, there's no proven formula. This is, here's what you include for onboarding and here's what you don't include. And so, how do you stand out, to create those meaningful, authentic, and welcoming touches, and to provide that new hire, that employee, and give them that sense of belonging as they navigate, what is an unknown to them. And so, one of the things I always suggest is, make pre-onboarding part of your company culture, and your people won't forget it, right? So if you make pre-onboarding part of your company culture, people will not forget it. There's a lot that can happen between the time a candidate accepts the offer and the time that they start. One example is I had someone who was starting, and because of different obligations, the start date was a little over a month away. And I recall in the actual interview process that they were going on vacation, they were having this birthday, and it was a really big celebration for them. And so one of the things that I like doing is, in that time, is making sure that I'm still connecting and communicating, with this new hire now who's not started yet, but I sent a little card and I said, hey, happy birthday. I know you like drinking coffee in the mornings with your spouse. You share that with me. Here's a gift card for Starbucks, right? And so there's so many ways that those little touches make meaningful, impactful moments. And, this person still calls me today and says, I will never forget that. You did some things even before I started that made me feel like, you valued me. Not just welcoming to them to the company, but that they mattered, and that I was really excited for them to start. So I would start by making pre-onboarding part of that. And then onboarding should be personalized, right? It should also include internal mobility as well. I recently made an internal move here at HiBob, and although I had been with HiBob for almost 3 years at that move, I still went through onboarding onto my new team. And what that did to me, and I didn't realize that was going to happen. I didn't know that. It was my first internal movement here. But it further strengthened my, and confirmed, my thought process on why I made the move to begin with, and why I'm still here at this company, and why I want to make this company as successful as possible. And so again, make pre-onboarding a part of your company culture and process, and then also, make sure it's personalized.
So I appreciate the personalized piece so much. I'm watching some of the chat here. People are sharing different things, like even in union environments, things like that. There's so many nuances to how onboarding can look and what it can be. And I think the big takeaway, listening to you share, Mike, is, do I feel like as the new hire, Mike is saying, how quickly can I get, get to work, basically. How quickly can I start earning my keep? Or how quickly do I feel like I'm in the right place, able to contribute? I've got the support I need. Like those are two different sorts of connotations. And for a lot of people, it's all right, you've been here for 10 minutes, get started. We'll do your paperwork later. And in others, it's we're so glad you're here. You have a key part to play. Before you get started, we want you to know some important stuff, both about us. We want to know some important stuff about you too, and start picking those things up and making it more of that relationship than just a transaction. You're here, start cranking out widgets. And so I appreciate that belonging piece you talked about there and how that piece connects in, because that's so important. Absolutely.
And Ben, I think it goes back to even the other questions that we talked about, what you said in the candidate process, right? Doesn't match with the now the new hire going through onboarding, right? Did you share what life is like? And was it honest and truthful? And then I also think it ties back into the other question on, you asked me earlier is, how long do you think an employee will last before they figure out, hey, this is the right place for me, right? So if things don't match up because the candidate process was, all good, and then I go through onboarding and it wasn't great, this affects, everything. And so, it's definitely something to think about and something to really dive into to see if there is efficiencies on how to level up every approach in the onboarding process.
Is it a springboard or is it a stumbling block? There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share this next slide really quickly. I give you a couple of quick takeaways. I know we got a couple of questions there. Zach, if you've got the other poll queued up while I'm talking through these really quickly, if you want to share that last poll, because I don't want to run out of time here, and then we'll address any questions we can in the last few minutes we have. Really quick, I want to give you a couple of things based on the data, some tips and suggestions. You've already got some good stuff from Mike already, and some of the things in the data. Number one, when you're putting together a job ad, a job description, talk not just about the industry you're in, but the impact the person will have. What we find in our testing with candidates is they're twice as likely to click on a job that you're sharing if you talk about the impact they're going to have on the community, the values your company has, those bigger things than just this is the space we operate in. So talk about that. Same thing on comp. 85% of the time, we give them a choice. They prefer a pay job posting that has pay data on it over one that does not. Candidates tell us, I mentioned this earlier, it came from the conversation, 84% of them tell us that 3 or more touch points is overkill. So keep that short as you can. And I know that's a challenge because hiring managers think their process is better. They've got this thing they're committed to. There were some good suggestions shared in the chat on how to remedy that. Video in the hiring process, not video interviews, but actual video you're sharing. The least preferred video, sorry, everybody, the least preferred video candidates want to see is something from a HR person or a recruiter. The next least preferred, the ones they don't want to see, is that company culture video that's just overarching and pretty and flowery and very polished. What they most prefer is if you can share a person who works here, a hiring manager, someone, even if it's not perfectly polished and pretty, talking about what it's like to be here. They care about that. They want to see themselves in that and see someone that makes them feel comfortable there. And the candidates, most of all, want a chance to show what they're made of. They want to get a chance. We actually asked them in our research, if you had a chance to just submit a resume or submit it and take some sort of short test or assessment to see how qualified you are, which would you prefer? They preferred the second one because they said it's about letting me put my best foot forward and be judged based on that. Not how well Mike had ChatGPT write his resume, not how well Ben had that resume writer, professional person write my resume, but how good I am and how connected I am to the actual job. So awesome. All right. So we got a couple of questions that have come in the last few minutes. We got just a few minutes left here. Mike, I'm going to drop this first one on you if you don't mind, this one on onboarding here. So Dan asked a question about how do you get that hiring manager involved in the onboarding piece, make them not just a passive spectator over here, but an active participant as they're going through this so that they not just have skin in the game, but maybe they can help personalize it too based on what they know of the job, the role, the team, things like that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Dan, great question. We've actually done just internal to HiBob, but we go through training and enablement with hiring managers as part of the process. And we share the good things that and things that we expect out of the hiring manager, but we also give them tools and we encourage them to use their stories and prep for those candidate meetings, right? So we provide them with a list of questions on here's how you could share our culture, here's how you could share our vulnerabilities and things that, sometimes we're scared to discuss. And so, making sure that your hiring managers are not just part of the team, but actually enabled. And I'll take me, for instance, my first, manager role, and did not get trained, but I was also expected to hire. And so I fumbled a lot. And so, that constant reassurance with hiring managers and making sure that you set the right expectations and then giving them those tools, I think is really key to get them involved in much better ways.
I talked to a company a while back that used the approach they called 10-100. So in the first 10 days, the manager had to lay out 100 touch points for that person. And some of those are people. 100 sounds like a lot. Some of those are people. Some of those are processes and things they had to sign off on. Some of those are work standard operating procedures they need to get familiar with. Some of that's just spaces to be in. But that got them thinking like, this isn't just show up. Do they have a computer? Do they have a phone? Okay, they're good to go. They had to think more expansively about that. And it got them to think really creatively about, hey, maybe I do need to tell them, here are the 3 restaurants that the team prefers to eat at lunch. So if you like to bring your lunch, maybe expect to do that once a week, or, once a week we budget for that. So expect to go out with us and spend some time there. Getting them thinking about those bigger things, not just telling the hiring manager they're gonna show up fully prepped and you can just get them their stuff and they're going to get going. All right, goodness, we're right at the top of the hour. So Mike, thank you so much for sharing, for bringing your wisdom, for bringing your passion for this, for helping these leaders out there. I appreciate you for spending some time with me and for spending some time with the team here as well. If he wants to reach out to you, your contact information here on the screen. Any last words before we wrap up?
Nope, just thank you for having me today, and I truly enjoyed it. Hope to see you at an event, or please reach out.
Awesome. Thank you again. And to everybody else out there, hope you got some good takeaways, ideas, things like that, good strategies to go out there, serve your candidates, serve your employer, and hopefully get more meaning from your work as an HR leader, a talent leader, trying to do the recruiting. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, and we'll catch you again next time.
Thank you, Ben.